Welcome to lesson 116, comparing and ordering decimals. Today we're going to talk about how to compare decimals and how to order decimals. This is much like when we compare and order whole numbers. However, because the decimal's in there, it becomes a lot different and a lot more complicated. One of the things that I want to make sure to emphasize is that the longer the number does not mean the bigger the number in this case. So we really want to make sure that we remember that and take our time when we are putting decimals in order from least to greatest or greatest to least. Again, we have to remember place value. When we talked about place value before, we talked about how everything to the right of the decimal are our pieces. So we have 1,427 pieces out of the 10,000 that we need. Everything to the left of the decimal is a whole number. So this is how many whole groups we have. This is how many parts of one group we have. So the more little pieces we have, the closer we are to having a full group, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the number is bigger. All right, so let's take a look at this. We want to order the decimals from least to greatest. I did give you this little chart in your notes as well, and I want you to use them because I think it'll be helpful. Okay, for the first one, we're just going to watch, and then you'll notice that the numbers here do not match the numbers here because I don't want you trying the first one with me. You're going to try the next one on your own. So when we are comparing numbers, just like before, it's really a good idea to line the numbers up by place value. So in this case, 1, 1, and 1 are all in the ones place. So 1, 1, and 1. The first number is 1 decimal 78, so 1 and 78 hundredths. So 1 and 78 hundredths. The next one, 1 and 3,305 ten thousandths. So keep writing that out. Okay, and the last one, 1 and 305 thousandths. Okay, so now what we're going to look at is which number is the smallest, because we're looking for the smallest value. Now, in the ones place, they all have a 1. So in the whole number category, they're all equal. Now we go to the tenths. Since 7 is bigger than 3, this number has to be bigger than both of these. So we know we're not going to look at this top number as being our smallest value yet. Now we have a 3 and a 3, so we move to the next column. The next column tells me I have a 3 and a 0 because we're not looking at this top number just yet, and I'm actually going to block that out just for the time being so that way we don't get confused. Okay, so we're just going to ignore that for right now. Now, because I have a 3 and a 0 here, I know that 0 is smaller than 3, so I know that this number right here has to be smaller than this number up here. So I know that my first and smallest number is 1 and 305 thousandths. Okay, and then we use the semicolon to separate our numbers because if we use a comma, it makes it look like the number is continuing. Okay, so now we're done with this bottom number, so I'm just going to black out this number. And I know you don't have this tool, but you can also use your finger to cover the numbers or use your pencil to cross them off when you're done. So again, because this has a 3 and this has a 7, this number here, even though it's longer, is smaller than 1 and 78 hundredths. Look at it this way. Pretend that the 0 and the 5 weren't there and we're just looking at money. If you have 78 cents and 33 cents, who has more money? Okay, so you really need to make sure you're focusing on the place value and the numbers inside the place value and not the length of the number. So our second number is going to be 1 and 3,305 ten thousandths. Okay, and then of course our last number has to be 1 and 78 hundredths. Now I did give you these little charts to help you with the next problem, and I gave you the charts for the problems to use on the problems after that. However, I will not always have these available for you, so you're going to want to make sure that you learn how to line them up using the decimal without using this chart. What I want you to do now is I want you to use this chart take your time and put the numbers in order from greatest to least. So from biggest to smallest. When you come back, we'll go over your answer. All right, you'll notice when we line up the numbers that in the tens we have all ones, in the ones we have all fours, then we get to the tenths. In the tenths we have 3, 0, and 3, so we automatically know that this number cannot be our biggest number because instead of having a 3 here, it has a 0. Now, here, when we get to the hundredths place, this 5 has nothing to be compared to. Because there's a decimal here, we can always add zeros to the end and it doesn't change the value. If I've added a 0 here, this becomes 140. If I add a 0 here, this is still the same thing. 3 tenths is equal to 30 hundredths. So for those of us, because this is like fractions, these two things are equal. We added a 0 up top and a 0 on bottom. They're still equal. Okay, so now I can see that the 5 is bigger than the 0. So I know that my first number has to be 14 and 35 hundredths. Okay, and now I'm done with that number. And since the 3 is bigger than the 0, my next number, my second number, has to be 14 and 3 tenths. Remember, we write it the original way that we saw it. So the first way we saw it was without this 0. So that's the way we want to write it. And our last number will be the 14 and 5 hundredths. Again, notice this number, even though it's shorter than this number, was actually bigger. So make sure to take your time, line up your decimals, okay, and use your place values to determine greatest to least, or least to greatest. It's a short lesson today, so what I want you to do, you have these 3 problems that I want you to work on your own, and you are going to post your answers to Edmodo. Now again, we talked about how to type in our answers. So when we type in our answers, and this is just an example, so if I were typing in 12 and 34 hundredths, and then we use the semicolon, okay, it's next to the L on your keyboard, and then 12, 200ths. Again, I'm making up these numbers as I go. Okay, make sure to use a semicolon. This is all I want to see when you're typing in your answers. So you can put 1 and then type in your answer. And then just enter down, 2, type in your answer. Make sure to use those semicolons though to separate out your numbers. And make sure to put a space between the semicolon and the number. Again, if you have any questions, please make sure to write them down in your workbook and or post them to Edmodo so that way we can go over them in class tomorrow.